So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the UK government threatened with legal action over the Australia trade deal. So a campaign group has taken the first steps towards legal action against the UK government over its free trade deal with Australia, arguing that it flouts Britain's international climate obligations. Global Feedback, a UK and Netherlands-based group, said it would seek a judicial review, claiming ministers failed to carry out proper due diligence on the environmental impact of importing Australian agricultural products such as beef and dairy. The move is the latest in a series of legal actions taken by campaigners against the government on environmental grounds. One recent successful case in the High Court forced the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to rewrite its net zero strategy. I imagine the UK joining the CPTPP could also be subject to a judicial review. I can't imagine looking at doing more trade deals with countries in Southeast Asia will comply with the UK's climate change targets. I think the only issue is Australia is a unique case, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, versus New Zealand, for example. The UK's Australia trade deal, signed in December 2021, was regarded as Britain's first post-Brexit trade deal negotiated from, quote, from scratch, end quote, but critics argue it was rushed through to meet arbitrary targets set by then Secretary Liz Truss. I wonder what Liz Truss is doing now, leaving the UK in a worse negotiating position. The deal is junk. It adds 0.02% to our GDP at best. It could add minus 0.02%. A massive giveaway to Australia. It will decimate British farming, and I doubt the consumer will actually benefit from this at all. I doubt we'll actually see cheaper products on the shelves. Former Environment Secretary George Eustace, Big George, said last November that the deal, quote, gave away far too much for far too little. In return, end quote, he had previously urged former Prime Minister Johnson to avoid repeating the one-sided concessions made to Australia in UK negotiations with India. This was wild given that he is a Brexiteer. He was even in charge of DEFRA at the time. We did hear about arguments between DEFRA and the Department for Trade, which makes sense given the Australia and New Zealand deals would be damaging to British farming. But for him to openly call out the deal was just crazy. The Cabinet has collective responsibility. If he was against the deal, he should have resigned. Instead, he was shuffled out. Global Feedback is claiming the deal did not take into account the fact that Australian cattle and dairy industries are likely more carbon intensive than their UK equivalents, and called the government's impact assessment report, quote, inadequate, end quote. A government-commissioned independent report by former food advisor Henry Dimbleby in 2021 suggested the carbon footprint of Australian beef was 50% higher than UK beef. I didn't know the carbon levels were so high in Australian farming. They do have a more industrial scale, I guess, which makes sense. Lower standards too, but for it to be that much higher is really bad. And then if you factor in the carbon impact of moving the goods from Australia to the UK, as well, the carbon levels would be horrendous. A big own goal for the UK, and a pointless one at that. This is from a government commissioned report too, so they were well aware of this. But Truss was desperate for a win, so she gave up farming to get that win. Ultimately, it played a part in her becoming Prime Minister, I believe, but that ultimately went really badly. But they are well aware of the environmental impacts. Minak Batters of the National Farmers Union, who we speak about way too often on the channel, I think, said the government had, quote, missed the opportunity to reach a genuinely innovative and world-class free trade agreement with Australia. This FTA simply opens up UK agricultural markets for Australian produce, whether or not produced to the same environmental and climate-friendly standards that are expected of the UK, end quote, she said. And I question what such an FTA would look like that's so innovative. FTAs are normally based around goods. Some services can be included, but that's becoming more of a thing now, I think, or at least I'm more aware of it now. I don't know what the chances were of the UK alone getting a deal that was something, that was world class. That's something the EU will manage to get to show us what a world class FTA looks like with Australia, given that they're negotiating a trade deal currently. The EU got a deal with New Zealand, but I don't know the details of the deal. But Batters is right about the UK agriculture being opened up by the deal. And it's not good for farming, especially when you look at the environmental impacts. Australian farmers have lower standards with industrial scales. It also impacts the processed food market as well, things like sandwiches and ready meals. We will see a lot more Australian meat in those, and I don't know if it will be labelled as such. This is not the first time an NGO has threatened legal action against the government over climate obligations. Last year, the High Court ruled the government's plan for reaching net zero was unlawful due to a lack of details. I didn't know the Tories did details, to be fair. And I'm glad that we still have access to judicial reviews. The Good Law Project have used judicial reviews to do great work, but it should not be up to the courts to keep resolving the issues the Tories make. Court cases are expensive to take up and often require crowdfunding. It costs the taxpayer money too, just because the Tories keep breaking the laws they set out. Absolute mugs. It costs us double, really, when you think about it. The spokesperson for the government said, quote, "It does not comment on legal proceedings. The UK is a global leader on climate change, and we continue to uphold our high environmental standards in our free trade agreements," end quote. And to quote the words of Joe Biden, that's malarkey. That's absolute malarkey. The UK is not upholding environmental rights in the deal. We are looking to get a deal with Malaysia via the CPTPP, which, this deal will not have the protections against things like palm oil, which is often linked to deforestation. The geography issues with trading more with Southeast Asian countries versus, buying more from countries local to us makes no sense, or even local farms to us, within the country or the union. The economic gains are minimal and has trade-offs. We don't know if the consumer will actually benefit from the savings either. This is just about optics wins. When companies start to sue the UK over lost profits, we will understand how badly we goofed. I hope this legal challenge wins, but at the moment, Australia is just yeah. But anyways, I'm gonna leave it there. Hopefully, this legal challenge goes through and wins. And like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and I'll catch you in the next one.